What's going on, everybody? What's going on, folks? And how we doing today? My name is David, and I'm your host of this incredible, legendary podcast, the Deconstructing Topic Podcast, where we talk about a little bit of it all. We grab a topic, we kind of we deconstruct it, and we kind of get to at least find out what the hell is going on. And once again, welcome to the legendary Deconstructing Topic Podcast. And today we got a good one because for the last few days or so, whatever the case, I'm getting texts, emails, DM. David, can you at least enlighten on what's going on what happened this past week in regards to the assassination of the Charlie Kirk, who's a founder of Turning Point USA and a conservative movement on the right side of the political aisle in this country. And I said, by all means, but I just had to wait to whatever the information is going on, because I always tell people, and I'm going to remind people, sometimes the narrative that they push on you is not necessarily the narrative. And it's one of those things that, hey, listen, I'm just going to touch a couple of things, a couple of observation from what I've been able to observe from my knowledge of things and from whatever it is. But that's why we got to, my peoples, especially, I'm going to kind of touch a little bit of nerves here. But I want people to listen, especially if you got kids, grandkids, whatever it is that tend to kind of pick a side when it comes to the political spectrum, and I'll be there in a second what I mean by that. Listen to this podcast because it's the one and one of the few, and maybe the only, there's others. But gotta hit that subscribe button, share button, all that good stuff, because I am one of the few who always think independent and I think on my own, and I tend to unplug myself, and I tend not for anybody to sway me on what I think about certain things. Maybe once in a while, whatever the case. But hey, listen, welcome to my podcast. Once again, my opinion, it's my opinions only. Whatever, I belong to a lot of organizations, and my opinion and how I see things are not affiliated to those organizations. Once again, I'm going to touch nerves here, but you know what? I love it. That's why you should, once again, bring your family into this conversation. If you are one person who listened to me, that's why you got to hit the like in the comment. Then the next time around, bring your family, because I'm for me. And one of the reasons I created this podcast is that saving a mind is saving a life. So let's get on with the show. The Charlie Kirk situation in regards to the assassination that happens this past week. Off the bat, I'm just going to tell you this, right? I'm not a fan of people celebrating or anybody, regardless of what your opposition is, because I always said, and I see that there's people, and even in my socials, who kind of, how can I say it to you? For the most part, they're not celebrating. So I don't have those type of people. But I don't want people to kind of celebrate what happened, because I always said, especially if you're standing on the left side of things, I always said a lot of things, like what happened the other day, they get co-opted. As one of the reasons why it took me some kind of days for me to kind of talk about it is because the sad thing is that maybe the narrative that they are pushing might not be the narrative at all. And I'll give you an example. As a matter of fact, a lot of people don't know this, that Martin Luther King, and what is recognized as his first assassination attempt, was made by, supposedly a black lady, elder black lady, Isola Curry, who had mental issues. Was a black woman. For it to be that, sadly, if she has struck Martin Luther King, and we're talking about 1958, 59, if I'm not mistaken, but if she have killed Martin Luther King, I hate to use the word, but if he would have deleted him, the rest is history. We wouldn't have what we got known as Martin Luther King. Sadly, he was assassinated second time around, perhaps more than the second time around, which happened to be a white nationalist who fit the narrative. But Isola Curry, a black woman, does not fit the narrative, did not fit the narrative of what it is. That's why I think that they say, she was having mental issues, which it could be. I'm just saying, you see how sometimes they play around with these narratives? So if you're out there trying to say, oh yeah, man, good for him, I'm going to say, no, stop. Because you feed off and you give that vibe, or you at least give ammunition to the people you are fighting against to pick and choose who they want to delete. And that's why I say, that's why I don't want to talk about much about the information, because it's still been on the investigation. We still don't know the narrative. As a matter of fact, perhaps there's something more sinister behind that. That's another different podcast. But I just want to touch bases with this. Not a fan of that, and not a fan of the cancel culture as well. Now, I understand that there's people who have been fired from their job or whatever it is. Again, America is just so strange. You know what I mean? And so sometimes we let our emotions, and our emotions is based on certain groups. And I'm going to say this because I wanted to say this, because this podcast is going to fall into what exactly I wanted to talk about once again. We got Charlie Kirk, who I'm going to describe as a white conservative. Now, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to repeat this from Malcolm X and his words. And then we'll get that ball rolling. We'll get to the second step of things. This is Malcolm X. And then a lot of people, and I always said, Malcolm X warned us about these things. This is what he said. The white liberal difference from the white conservative only one way. The liberal is more deceitful than the conservative. Both want power, but the white liberal is the one who has perfected the art of posing as the Negro friend and benefactor. With that said, I'm going to bring these two factions, and I'm going to say off the bat, the white liberal and the white conservative factions are the reason why there's division in this country. And I'm going to go and talk about Charlie Kirk, because I'm not a fan of Charlie Kirk. And just as I'm not a fan of people on the liberal, the Hassan Pikers, which basically kind of does the same thing as Charlie Kirk in a way sense. These people get paid just to go to these college campuses, go on TV, go on the Twitch, go on this to talk about things and talk about, debate and policy and so forth. You got David Packman from the left, Laura Loomer from the right. These people get paid so that we could sit down and we could talk about them. And there's one thing that the white factions, the white conservative, white liberal have. And I remember I reached out to Charlie Kirk years ago. Matter of fact, I reached out to both, but I reached out to Charlie Kirk after seeing this talk about gun violence, right? For some reason, he touched bases, but I sent a list of... I compiled a list of, how can I say, organizations, nonprofit. He does, the founder of a nonprofit. Charlie Kirk, let me tell you something. Again, I'm going to say both sides, but this is a little podcast where I'm talking a little bit more about Charlie Kirk. You see, his organization, the Turning Point USA, those people got millions, right? They got the means. And I always said, these people got the means to address certain things, and, that, let's say, are lacking of. Let's say in the case of Charlie Kirk, when I sent him the list in regards to, hey, listen, in the Bronx, there's a couple of places, a couple of gyms that you could donate, domestic violence, which is a thing. We'll touch about that. But the thing is this, and once again, one of the things that it kind of bothers me is that these two white factions, and its supporters, they have the means to address the lack of funds in certain communities they tend to vouch for. But all they want to do is pump money on rallies. Charlie Kirk with the pro-Trump rally. And then, you got the people like the Hassan Pikers or whatever it is from the liberal side. They want to pump money onto the anti-Trump rally. They want to do conference. They want to go after each other. They want to, and the thing is that these people are put in front of us. And at the end of the day, these two people don't do anything for any of our community, especially the black community. All they want to pinpoint and put blame. And the sad thing is that these two factions hide behind the Republican Democrat Party. But yet when we vote, I always say, when you vote, don't think that you're voting for people with policy. You're voting ideologies. And I'm not saying that you cannot find candidates on both sides of those parties. I'm a more like a third party kind of independent type of person. But I'm not saying you can't. But for the most part, if you do find candidates that might be like, okay, they're about us, nah, they parrots, basically, on both sides of the aisle. And once again, Charlie Kirk, hey, listen, and I see that a lot of Christians, a lot of the evangelical Christians who kind of are sad and whatever the case might be, if he was about that life. Because again, he was making money off trying to educate and kind of, can I say, not for the young youth to be brainwashed and talk about Jesus. And I said to myself, in the history of Christianity, a lot of people, the apostles, Jesus Christ, even if you look at the 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s, the civil rights, you saw a lot of Christians behind the black community to say, hey, listen, let's fight the fight. Let's the good versus the evil, basically. But this is no longer the good versus evil. It's just these two factions who co-opted America, and then we need to be on one side. I don't think that we should. I think that somewhere down the line, especially my people, the black community, Latino, I think we need to unplug. And to see these evangelical people out there, oh, with Charlie, again, the talk is one thing, but walk the walk. If Charlie Kirk, and it's going to sound a little controversial, look where was he assassinated. In rally, talking about the same thing. He does the same thing against the people that basically you doing the same thing off. You understand? If Charlie Kirk was about that life, he would have be doing for the black community. He would have been doing like a little fundraiser, little soup kitchen, whatever it is, toy drive. If he was assassinated in that environment, maybe I'd be like, damn, that's messed up. I'm just saying. But you see what happens in this country with these two factions? All they want to do is sit in front of the TV, debate, do these rallies and so on, and no one seems to do anything. And it's like example. When George Floyd's situation happened, once again, these two factions are there going at each other like, hey, well, it's your fault because crime happens in these liberal cities. Well, no, it's your fault. Come on, man. Comes to a point that you say to yourself, it's getting fatigue. And I reach out to leaders, black leaders, and I said, unplug yourself. But sadly, what happens is this, and I'm more critical of the white liberal because I'm in New York City, and they tend to have the means, but they not going to address these issues that happens in our community. Matter of fact, domestic violence is still a thing in the black community. And I always said, look, it's this. If a young black kid grows up where his mother is being beaten, and, for the most part, based on stats, women are the victims. If they see that their mother is being abused and disrespected, what's going to make it seem that they're going to respect their teachers when they go to school, their peers when they go to school, their neighbors, I'm sorry. Well, what's going to make it seem that they're going to respect other people if they see that their mother is being disrespected? How can we trying to figure something out? Are we telling men, hey, listen, are we putting more punishment towards that? There's a lot of things that we could do, and I've addressed, like, hey, listen, the other day I compiled a list of boxing gyms. Now you might say, oh, wait a minute. So what are you trying to get at here? Boxing is a little bit violent, but, boxing is the avenue, just like if you're working out, just like if you're jogging, the avenue where the energy. If you could find a way that young men who are bound to be fathers in our ghettos, in our hood, if you give them something to do, maybe they'll channel that anger or that something, because a lot of times domestic violence, and sadly there are people who pay the price when it comes to the situation. Sometimes it could take one situation where it sparks one thing, and a lot of domestic violence situations happen because of that one incident. Imagine if, whatever the case, we find other ways. Now we could say, let's say with the Charlie Kirks, preach the good gospel, Jesus, and so on. But sadly, one of the things that we have come across, and I have come across in these churches, that nobody's preaching sin. Everybody wants to prosperity. Everybody wants to gravitate to something that's not their sinful nature. People go to church, and I don't know where they're talking about, if I give this, I'm going to get more blessings. And that's why domestic violence is also a thing in our communities in church, in the Christian charismatic community. So in terms of that, and my understanding, and listen, if when Charlie Kirk spoke about these violence, he was more like, this happens in liberal cities. That's why Democrats, again. Now, sadly, if he indeed would have said, you know what, let me do a little fundraiser, go to the bar. He's from Arizona. So Phoenix, Arizona, maybe got their issues. But if he goes to more of the Chicago, New York City, Baltimore, if he talk that talk and do a little crazy thing, now he probably would not been invited to those circles. But I'm one to say, listen, I'm tired of people having conversation. Oh, where can we have a common ground? Why is it that it's about what we could talk about? Why not what we could do? If Charlie Kirk went in Baltimore and there was these Christian, liberal Christians, so on, who don't have the means because of their lack of fun or because of whatever it is. If Charlie Kirk say, listen, I'm going to establish this so we could do a Thanksgiving feast for those in the community, then if you are those in the spectrum, then you would have said, hey, listen, by all means. And this is exactly what I talk about when it comes to these factions. Now, as I'm critical to the white liberal, because of certain things that, I remember years ago I participated in a toy drive, right? I take it back. Not only everybody participated, but I actually helped kind of fund that toy drive. This years ago. And we're talking about here in the boogie down Bronx in the Bronx. And I'll be straight up, there was somebody with the biggest LBGT flag that I ever seen. Straight up. And I told the person, hey, listen, can you put that away? We're not here about, your agenda. We're not here about that. We're here about give smiles to these kids. And sometimes I feel like that's what the white liberals sometimes tend to concentrate on certain issues, LGBT, abortion, just to name a few. And it seems like if in order for us in our community to address gun violence and domestic violence, we have to be like, oh, yeah, we're going to address those situations. All I say, you want my help, you got to help me first. That's all I'm saying. In regards to the white conservative and why I'm more critical in terms of the religious side is that a lot of white conservative who said, like Charlie Kirk, who said that are Christian, I don't know what the hell you guys are talking about. No pun intended. Sometimes I'm saying to myself, why is it that we always point the finger? Look, Jesus and our good Lord, the good gospel, we already know that whatever is wrong, it's there in the scriptures. Now, my understanding has always been that it's always the message of the good gospel. But at the same token, it doesn't mean that the good gospel is like, this is a sinful nation, and there's no way as trans, and there's no way as this, because you put so much emphasis and you say to this. What can we do to meet us in the middle? And I'll give you another example here. The person who have been accused of assassinating Charlie Kirk, let's say if indeed the narrative is that, because of his comments and his opinion, I personally don't think that he got assassinated because of his opinion. I think there's something more sinister. But you know what? That's another little topic there. Because sadly, this country has been co-opted by a certain group. Wink, wink, a certain group who, if you look at the JFK assassination, they also kind of, I'm going to say, like, I'm just hinting. But let's just go back to the person that assassinated Charlie Kirk. Once again, if he identified as the white liberal, ideology, you're telling me that you are from well-to-do means, my understanding, his family has some money, that you're going to spend your energy and money on, deleting someone from the other side when you could have, once again, done something with the money that you had or whatever, the means, the energy, whatever it is, to help those people who are in your community. I want people in the white liberal to look at who is in your community. For some reason, you think that it's just the LGBT. For some reason, it's just a woman, a man, feminist, or whatever it is. Again, don't go out there and show face when a George Floyd happens. But then let's say if Tyrone and Malik have been shooting at each other and there's 10, black kids that are victims of gang, violence and all that, and you don't show up there, like if that's not a problem, that is a problem. That's definitely a problem. But don't go out there and pat yourself on the back and say, Black Lives Matter. by definition of Black Lives Matter, which I'm not too fond of the organization, but I do understand the situation with Black Lives Matter. I like to think that Black Lives Matter is not just police brutality, but it's also violence, domestic violence, gang violence, gun violence, whatever violence, and other means of addressing poverty. Again, you're not going to see these individuals not on that side. And guess what? They'll spend more energy because the Charlie Kirks of the world will just start doing rallies and start calling all you out. Oh, look, the liberals don't care about you. That's why you got to vote for the Republicans. No, you don't. Again, my thing has always been that these two factions have co-opted it. I think that by now, when you're listening to me, you're probably going to start understanding, oh, but David, this, but David, that. Don't give me a but. Brother Malcolm X talked about it. He was the most vocal and most visible. We had other Adam Clay in power. Martin Luther King at one point. Fred Hampton, sadly, who was gunned down, Black Panther. And Fred Hampton is a little bit a different cat. He was a young cat. And, Fred Hampton was the type of dude, you know what, we can trust these people. And remember, we're talking about in the 60s, 70s. That was the wild thing out there. If we talk about, political violence now, Fred Hampton was 20 years old. And what he did in the Black Panthers in Chicago was basically, let's do our own thing. Let's build our own schools, hospital. As a matter of fact, there were those my understanding, in the white nationalists who were poor. And again, this is another common thing because Charlie Kirk wouldn't, and those people on that side, we already know that the people in getting public assistance, because, the population is white people, but nobody asks, what are we going to do to take white people off welfare? You know what I mean? There's a lot of white poor people. A lot. If you talk about the black in the liberal cities, the white in these red states, the Mississippis, the Kansas, the Georgias, depending on what side, they poor. They just, what are we doing? You know what I'm saying? But we go back to Fred Hampton. Hey, listen, even when he was trying to unify these poor people, is the poor versus the rich, because that's one of the things even though he was preaching that, Black Power, Black Panther, whatever, the dude was about to if he saw a white nationalist who was poor, he'd say, come on in, brother, we're feeding you. And guess what happened? Bam! That's what happened. And once again, who assassinated these individuals? These two factions. Because there's a lot of people that hide, and then people say, but David, don't you think, are we not have to pick a side, or don't you think that we are being pushed? Yeah, you guys are being pushed. It doesn't mean that you have to agree. Again, and with all due respect to my LGBT community, there's no reason to bring the biggest LGBT flag I ever seen in a toy drive. For what? And then you're going to start talking about LGBT issues in a goddamn toy drive where there's kids out there who don't even know what the hell is LGBT. But guess what? They born a lot of times in poverty. A lot of times because their parents sadly fell into the being victims of the drugs that is being kind of thrown in our neighborhood. A lot of I've seen a lot of kids living with their grandparents because either one of their parents is on some type of drug or whatever it is, or got killed, gang violence, whatever violence. Even walking sometimes in the hood, you don't have to belong to anything. But if two people are in the opposite of violence, of gangs, and start shooting at each other, a couple of innocent people are going to die. And that's what I'm all about, that life. And that's basically what I could bring to you in regards to this situation, is that it comes to a point that we, as a society, that if you're a white liberal, listen to this, and if you're a white conservative, listen to this. I'm pretty sure you got the means. Like I told somebody, you want to, if you're a white liberal that, you want to, it's okay for the migrants to come in. I say, you know what? You got the means, put them in your neighborhood. But then they come here to the black neighborhood, and guess what? Remember, poverty leads to a lot of things, and poverty leads to violence. You know what I'm saying? If you're a white conservative, stop pointing the fingers. You also got the means. Sometimes you guys got the means in a different type of way, but you guys got the mean and talking about that good thing of Jesus and the gospel and sin. But yet, for the most part, the white conservative don't do much in certain aspect. Last time I checked, the one thing the white conservative tend to do is to adopt kids. It's a lot of kids out there without fathers. And not because the fathers are, how can I say, is irresponsible, but sadly because a lot of things happens. Drugs happen. Violence happen. A lot of things. Even kids without their mothers. Victims of domestic violence. Domestic violence don't necessarily have to be that you get beaten. Sadly, a lot of times is that you get deleted. And if you're in the black community and you fall into these two groups for some reason, and I'm going to do another podcast, think on your own, think independent, think exactly what is the issues that your community is facing. So that next time somebody tells you anything otherwise, all you have to do, I'm not fighting for your cause until we address these situations. If I look at the situations with the immigration, you know what happens in a lot of migrants? They do work. I love my migrants. I love my immigrants, whatever the case might be. A lot of do work. But you know what happens there too? Violence as well. Because sadly, when you start grabbing these pockets of Mexicans, Ecuadorian, whatever it is, they do their gang thing, they do their thing, and then they go fight each other. And again, and we lost a life in terms of Charlie, which it should have not happened. Now, again, if in this country, if we have opinions and we just talk about our opinions, absolutely. But if one thing I've learned in this country, we are not free. And we don't really have the freedom to talk about our opinion. Because if you work for a private company and your opinion does not align with those who are around you, you're going to get fired. And I'll say this much, and I remember years ago, in Trump's first term, I didn't vote for Trump. But my opinion is that we're going to focus too much on him, that we're not going to address the situations that happen in our neighborhood for the 300,000th time, And there were a couple of people that kind of took offense to that. And they were like, oh, well, you're a Trumper, and how can you not go after him? And I'm like, do you see what I mean? Exactly the point here. America, let's get it together. Reach out to me. Once again, feel free to like, comment, share. We're doing our thing. And we're doing our thing, and we're doing our thing forever. But Deconstructing Topic Podcast, and I myself, we're gonna, you always got some good ones coming up. That's why you got to follow and hit that subscription. We making it happen. I'm out of here. Much love. Peace out. And have a blessed day. Take care. Peace.